that's about as good as it always gets. And so I'm humbled and deeply grateful. Dolores, you took the time to be here. Unsurprisingly, though, you are here because we're here to advance a cause that you've championed for quite literally decades. We talk about health care for all. We have politicians of all political stripes over the course of decades preach the principle. We have standing ovations and audiences large and small. A principle is advanced. Elections come, go. Politicians come and go. Years become decades. In decades, we've seen inaction. Finally, we're at a point where we're making those words real. We are implementing our ideals. We are manifesting this principle, this fundamental notion that so many of us have been preaching for years and years and years. And here in the largest state in our union, in the state of California, we are positioned with this budget to be able to deliver on what we've been promoting: universal health care for all, regardless of pre-existing condition, regardless of the ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. We believe in this principle. We believe in the right to quality health care. We believe we are strengthened as a community. We also believe that families are strengthened, particularly in a state as diverse and large as the state of California, with so many mixed status families, with children themselves that may have health care, but a working mom that just got a mammogram and it didn't turn out as well as she had hoped, and now she is suffering the consequences of early diagnosis of breast cancer, and yet she, at just 35 years old, does not have access to health care. What that does to that young child, what that does to the family, the impact that has on the community, our economy, is profound and pronounced. And so we're here in that spirit to reconcile that, to strengthen our families, to strengthen our community, to strengthen the economy here in the state of California. For those, it's like clockwork, that are critical of this proposal, I would only offer this. We have universal health care in this state and in this country, but it's on the back end. It's called the emergency room, and it's costing you, the taxpayer, a fortune. If you care not just about values and principles of morality, but if your only values and principles are advanced through economics, then that alone should be an argument in favor of universal health care. Why not invest in treating people, in preventing the most acute conditions that tend to manifest on the back end, and as taxpayers be out of pocket as a consequence of that? Why not get that, as we struggle through the latest surge of this pandemic, why not get that preventative vaccine at extraordinarily low cost because you're covered, then wait for the ravages of the disease on the back end, where we end up paying for that uncompensated care, all of us, not just as it relates to counties and general funds, but all of us that have private health insurance who have higher premiums as a consequence. So this is about saving money. This is about strengthening families, and as I said, strengthening communities and the economy here in the state of California, and it's about time. It is a point of deep pride, not just principle, that we're here, in particular in the Central Valley, where we come back over and over and over again to make the point that this state is for all Californians. And one of the most dynamic and vibrant parts of California is represented not just here in Lamont, but throughout this region and the fastest growing part of the state of California. And we look forward to working with the legislature, with the Assemblymember Salas and his colleagues over the course of the next many months. Senator Durazo and Rambulo have been credible champions of these principles over the course of the last number of years to get this job done and begin this process anew by the end of this calendar year, where the first cohort will be expanded for those, as Dolores said, that currently are without that health insurance. Happy to answer, of course, any questions on costs, any questions about next steps, but we implement a rather presented yesterday a fully balanced budget in the state of California. We're enjoying record surpluses, record reserves, paying down a record amount of unfunded health care liability. We're being wise with our investments, looking at one-time surpluses and one-time investments. At the same time, we're not neglecting people in the state that are vulnerable, people that are struggling. And this is one of our top priority investments, not by any stretch the only investment in the healthcare space. We've expanded coverage to the middle class, and we're looking at affordability and price reductions in particular with high-cost pharmaceuticals. Everybody we had in mind this year as it relates to our healthcare investments. But when we talk about everybody, we're going to be inclusive to the 2+ million Californians that are working every single day, 10% of the workforce in the state of California, of which the vast majority have lived in the state for over a decade. And those are people, regardless of their immigration status, that pays billions of dollars a year in taxes each and every year in the state of California. And so I'm proud to be here. We promoted this 3+ years ago on the trail, and here we are 3 years later, and we have the prospect to do something historic and meaningful, and we hope to see this replicated all across the country. I'll close just briefly on a couple of other important points. Dr. Galley's here. Everybody very familiar with the moment we're living in as it relates to the surge in Omicron cases. California not immune from that. Our positivity rate's up to 22.4% today, substantially lower than states, for example, like Texas and Florida, a little over 34% today. It's not a point to dismiss or contrast, it's a point to observe, and that is all across this nation we are struggling not only with an increase in cases, but the capacity in clinics like this in our hospital system to provide quality care. It's not just about beds, it's also about staff. And that staffing shortage is profound. Yesterday we talked a little bit about it in the budget. I want to remind folks that we are being very aggressive in advancing our staffing efforts, particularly with contract staff. Over 2,225 contract staff we've been able to secure, bringing them into the state. 481 specifically here in the Central Valley. We are increasing our testing access as well as vaccine access points. We deployed the National Guard into, all across this state in the 50 specific sites, notably our OptumServe sites. We'll be expanding into the Central Valley and San Joaquin and into Madera. We're in Stanislaus already with that National Guard support. You'll see more National Guard support over the next week, specifically here in the Valley. We're hoping to contract an additional 1,250 outside staffing to bring into the state to help support this surge over the course of the next few weeks. So that's a top priority. Number two, we're also mindful of being a top priority, keep our kids safely in school. And that's why a few weeks ago we announced that it was our goal to find and procure and distribute some 6 million over-the-counter tests to our school children. As of yesterday, where all of the schools finally opened in the state of California, we actually exceeded that goal. 10.9 million over-the-counter tests, 10.9 million have been delivered since that announcement, 13 million just since the first few days of December. While that's impressive from my perspective, it's not enough. We recognize that. We continue to work to find more testing kits across the country, though I should reflect and point out that today the federal government announced that they, on their goal of 500,000 new tests, have procured just 50 million for the country. California has been able to draw down 13 million ourselves over the course of just the last few weeks in a similar period of time. That puts in perspective the historic effort, heroic perhaps, effort that Dr. Galley and his team and our Office of Emergency Service advanced. I'm really proud of their work. It was hard. There were some fits and starts, some delays, but I'm really proud of that work. And that's why we know how many kids, for example, at LA Unified School District tested positive, because they got tested. And that was exactly the reason we wanted those tests out. And in some ways, it's discouraging. In other ways, it's encouraging to know that you're positive. to then have the opportunity to apply the rules as it relates to isolation and masking and allowing family units to know and be protected as a consequence. But it also was encouraged to know it was a lower percentage than community spread in the broader region. And it also highlights the last point I wanted to make. And that is not dissimilar to what's happening in the healthcare system is happening in our school system. And that's why today we've signed an executive order allowing flexibility for staffing to address short-term staffing needs, particularly with retirees and substitutes, to allow more flexibility to address the issue, not just, again, of the students that are testing positive, but many members of staff in districts large and small up and down the state of California. That executive order expires the end of March. Again, these are short-term challenges that require short-term and targeted solutions. So both on healthcare and on education, we're moving to provide flexibility and support as needed, recognizing we still have more work to do, but proud nonetheless that we are leaning in and working collaboratively with our partners up and down the spectrum, both again within the educational system and the healthcare system. But I'll end as we began with points of pride, or at least an emphasis to point to the pride that I have, and I believe the overwhelming majority of the legislature shares, and that is being in this position to once again lead on healthcare and provide a pathway and a framework for 1.1 million undocumented residents in the state of California to avail themselves to high quality, comprehensive Medi-Cal care, long-term, short-term, preventative, as well as in-home support service care and coverage. California, once again, leading. With that, we're happy, of course, to answer any questions.
Yes, good afternoon, Governor. Christian Galeno with KGET and Telemundo Valle Central. Two questions. The first one, Kern County is a predominantly red county, conservative. What's your message to those that think that this may lead to an uptick in more undocumented residents coming in, but also to those that oppose giving any aid to the undocumented community? And then the second question is, the price tag on this is obviously about $2.2 billion. Right now, the state does have that surplus in dollars because of the federal aid that we've been receiving in the past couple of months. What's going to be done to ensure that this funding continues years after, you're out of office as well, and that this is something that continues to benefit the undocumented communities of the state?
I'll remind you, California is the fifth largest economy in the world, and while $614 million in this budget year is a significant amount of money, California is well positioned to make that long-term investment. Number two, and it is true as well, that 2.2 is the full cost of annualization after full implementation, but $614 million general fund proposal in this year's fiscal budget. As it relates to this state, we're the most diverse state in the world's most diverse democracy. This is a state where just shy of 10% of our workforce are undocumented. That workforce built Kern County, built this state. Workforce is out there every single day taking care of it. It's not just the ag industry. It's not just the construction industry. It's professional services. Folks across the spectrum that are there every single day. And I think those the workers and that workforce was exposed for the remarkable grit and tenacity during this pandemic, where folks weren't dialing it in, weren't calling home sick. We're there for each and every one of us. They had our backs. And if there was ever a moment to reflect the point of pride at that workforce and their families and what they're doing to sustain the economies, not just here in Kern, but all throughout the state of California and this country, it was during this pandemic. And so I am very proud of California having the backs of our diverse communities. 27% of this state is foreign born. This nation was founded as a nation of immigrants. I will defend that diversity. I will defend that workforce. I'll defend these families. And I will illuminate people to the fundamental fact that they already are providing universal health care, but on the back end. And again, challenge you, those of you that don't believe in the principle, why do you maintain a system that's costly and inefficient, that does not lower costs for everyone and does not provide the outcomes to keep our communities healthier and safer. I'm not interested in inefficiencies. I'm not interested in the status quo. I think we can do more and better and lower costs for everybody. That's what this proposal represents.
Hi, Governor. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Vonnie Patino with KERO. My question is in terms of Covered California. What will happen to that plan? And also, we know that currently Covered California, the cost varies by county. So will we see that also translate into this new plan?
Well, I'm really proud. You know, California 2 years ago, I had the privilege of working with Senator Salas and others. We expanded healthcare subsidies and deepened existing subsidies for middle-class families in the state. We were the first state in America to support middle-class Kern County families with subsidies through the health exchange, through Covered California. Interestingly, we were rewarded not only in terms of the expanded benefits benefiting tens of thousands of Californian families, but the Biden administration took note and the federal government appropriated dollars to replicate that expansion. And as a consequence, we are saving $333 million in this year's budget because it's now being backfilled by the federal government. That will allow us to use that $330 million to expand coverage in other areas and strengthen our California Health Exchange and strengthen Covered California. So I'm very proud of that, and I appreciate you bringing up Covered California. We are going to buttress our health exchange even further, and no one does what Peter Lee has been able to accomplish at Covered California as effectively and efficiently as the state of California. As it relates to the question of sustainability, we hope that we have a Congress, not just a president, but a Congress that advances a similar cause, and that is the cause of universal health care. And ultimately, these exchanges are not necessary, but until then, California will continue to lead and assert itself. And I say this often, success leaves clues. And some of our nation-leading efforts as it relates to these expansions have left clues, and the federal government has followed, and we are all benefiting from that, and I hope in the future we'll benefit from the announcement we're making here today.
We've also heard a lot of the word access and the language being used to promote this plan. What exactly does that mean? Are there going to be any limits or any requirements for the plan?
Yeah, it's full scope Medi-Cal, and you may have heard me mention in-home support services and long-term care. It's for low-income eligible, full scope Medi-Cal expansion. Access is a principle. We talk about universal coverage. Anyone can attest, even those with the fanciest of health insurance, that it's not always on demand because of the inefficiencies in our healthcare delivery system. So one doesn't want to overpromise in that front. And you're already experiencing those backlogs, even in this community, notably even in this clinic, because of the pressures, particularly as it relates to this pandemic. And it's a proof point of access not only always being as timely as we'd like it to be. So access is the principle. It's along the lines of that full scope Medi-Cal that currently exists for what we estimate the end of the calendar year will be about 14.5 million or so Californians. That's the fiscal year promoted number of beneficiaries. And this again just allows for those that have been excluded the opportunity to be included.
Hello, my name is Sam Morgan with the Bakersfield, California newspaper. With this announcement, obviously it's expanding healthcare to a lot of Californians, but I'm wondering, how does it play into your commitment to the single-payer system when you're campaigning, and has your thinking changed on that plan with this announcement?
Well, I campaign on universal health care. We're delivering that. I'm just 3 years into my term. I think it's 3 years this week, and we've had a busy year and a half with this pandemic as well, so I'm really proud of being where we are today. Also proud of the fact that we are pursuing federal waivers. We have letters, and we've been negotiating discussions with the Biden administration. Similar efforts fell short, not surprisingly, with the Trump administration as it relates to flexibility to pilot key components of single-payer financing. We put together a commission, funded it with millions of dollars. They're coming out with a report in just a matter of months about different strategies, different approaches to single-payer financing. We want to do it in a practical way. We want to do it in a thoughtful way, in a judicious way. But meanwhile, we're not waiting. We're leaning in, providing more coverage, and we continue to lead in this respect on single-payer financing that is more broadly defined to include, for example, going after high-cost pharmaceuticals in this state. We created something called CalRx. A number of years ago, we started to pull in, again, notion around single-payer financing, leveraging dollars. We brought in the private sector to allow the private sector to participate with the state to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. We expanded that last year to expand for Medi-Cal and then allow other plans to join in a version of a single-payer financing for pharmaceuticals. And just yesterday, I announced that California is poised, we're not ready to announce this formally, to be one of the first states to manufacture, through the CalRx program, our own insulin, which will substantially reduce the cost of insulin and leverage the state's purchasing power. That's the spirit around single payer, and that's the spirit we are pursuing in real time. And I'll close by saying, for me, single payer is not a platitude. When you're governor, you got to be in the how business. I have studied the Bavarian model. I've studied the UK model. There's a distinction between the two. There are multiple different versions of single-payer financing around the globe, and we've tasked this commission to understand them more fully, because I do believe seek first to understand before you're understood. And while we all understand the importance of dealing with the inefficiencies of our healthcare delivery system, and I believe in a single-payer financing model, the how at a state level is the question that needs to be answered thoughtfully, and we, I think, are taking an appropriate tack with the work that we've done over the course of the last few years.
Hi, thank you for your time today, Governor. I'm Maddie Gannon with KGT 17 News. A lot of politicians in the area on both sides of the political spectrum have noted that while there's money to address drought in your proposal yesterday, there's no additional money specifically for water storage, which they argue is desperately needed here in the Central Valley. Why is that water storage not a priority?
Well, it's not true. And with respect, one has to disabuse themselves that water storage is just about being above ground. Water storage is about groundwater replenishment, conjunctive use. It's about cleaning up our groundwater supply. It's about supporting efforts like SGMA, which has $300 million in the budget. We put $5.2 billion last year for water efficiency, conservation, supporting small farmers. Probably a few counties that will be bigger beneficiaries of those dollars than Kern County themselves. We added an additional $750 million in that response, and we set aside hundreds of millions of dollars that we will determine its best use on the basis of negotiation with the legislature. And I'd encourage those same elected officials that have strong opinions to engage the legislature in the utilization of those discretionary dollars, work with us over the course of the next few months. That's $6 billion without going to the ballot for those that are fiscally conservative, though I often question those that are fiscally conservative when they advocate for certain things that are quite contrary. But for those that are fiscally conservative, I hope they would mark some consideration that we're doing that on a cash basis without going out and getting bonds and paying the interest on those bonds. $6 billion without precedent, and also point them out. And I hope they're familiar with the $2.7 billion that is above ground storage, disproportionately, though not exclusively, that was set forth in a bond that was approved by the voters many years ago. Folks up there in Colusa County know well Sites Reservoir as an example, which may be the first above ground storage site that has been constructed in the state in quite some time, that there's tremendous amount of progress being made on that site, and we are moving in that direction and monitoring. I'm not ideologically opposed to above ground storage, but that's not the exclusive approach and solution to our water crisis. And with respect, those that have experienced, as we all have, the drought in the last few years, it's hard to fill up something when there's nothing to fill it up with. And that said, I'm not naive about the extremes and the storms and storm water capture, which is included in a lot of these proposals and the opportunity to be more creative with the abundance because of the extreme conditions that we're experiencing because of climate-induced realities. And that's why California has a $22.5 billion climate proposal, building on top of last year's $15.1 billion climate proposal to clean up the air in Kern County, to clean up the air and the toxicity in the Central Valley, to electrify our vehicle fleets and the drayage trucks that are out there, to provide support for electric vehicle infrastructure so you don't have to go to the gas station and worry about where OPEC is marking the market and how the gas industry is manipulating prices, to have some more confidence and stability and to really leap into the future. And so I'm really proud of the budget across the spectrum, drought as well as climate investments, unprecedented in the state's history.
I'd also like to ask about the solar tax exclusion law. Some in local government here have said it's a barrier for them to support more solar projects because they say it makes the county miss out on millions of dollars in taxes that go to fund programs in Kern. What would you say to them regarding that?
Well, I want to applaud the leaders in Kern County. I think you have another very large-scale project that was just recently announced, some 300 union jobs, which half have to be local, supported jobs for large-scale solar. The infrastructure in Kern County is particularly, conducive and supportive of those large-scale solar. You've got community choice aggregators in the Silicon Valley, not just down here, that would be beneficiaries, of course, all the jobs that are created. I am mindful of the property tax question, to your question, and that is something that is not only on our radar, it's something that is being discussed and debated in Sacramento. I should also note, and I think this is important because I'm here, I do believe that the state of California needs to do more and a better job to accelerate our transition. As you know, in transition I mean away from oil. And I know that's particularly challenging here in Kern County. I deeply understand that. And I want to point to $600 million we put in last year's budget to help support regional economic development. And I also want to point out, and I want to thank Mayor Bakersfield. Karen has done an amazing job. So many in this region that initiated a program called B3K. A few years ago, we funded it with a modest $600,000 for planning. Last year, the $600 million came from that. This year, we are putting hundreds of millions more that will disproportionately benefit Kern County, including backfilling property tax losses associated with that transition away from oil. So it connects a dot to the concerns around oil industry jobs beginning to decline and what replaces on the back end as it relates to not only jobs and economic development, but revenue. And so we are mindful of that. We put $265 million for new oil capping jobs and training and grants, in addition to considerations around property tax backfills, all with an eye of support here in Kern County and the broader region.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming back to the Valley, Governor. We appreciate you being here. A lot of our immigrant communities are afraid of asking for any help from the government because of fear of deportation. Even those affected by the virus during this pandemic refuse to go to hospitals. How can we assure that their information is not going